Be yourself, be positive. Just another mindset.
Hello, friends, and welcome to a new episode of the Just Another Mindset podcast. We need a paradigm shift if it comes to our economic and social systems. Let us drive this change together. The Just Another Mindset podcast shares inspiration and tangible techniques on how to create seismic shifts in an outdated system, collectively and for individuals alike. My name is Ismael, and each week I bring to you a relevant conversation, message, or theme that will not only entertain you, but help you to change towards a more meaningful and satisfying life. Get encouraged by listening to successful thought leaders, inspiring individuals, and impressive changemakers. Change from within will last and create positive results for all of us. Let us get inspired and embrace collective changes for the better. In this episode, I speak to Aquayemi Claude, who is a social and environmental activist. We talk about choice and equal opportunity. Claude is an activist and he has engaged for the climate and drastic changes in our education systems. We discuss the process of finding your value and starting to act upon them. You will learn about neurodiversity and why this plays a role in designing education models and just workplaces. We discuss the connection of entrepreneurship, activism, and artificial intelligence, and you will hear about hope. Wonderful. And with that, Aquayemi Claude, a warm welcome to the Just Another Mindset podcast. And my first question for you today is, how do you feel and what is on your mind?
I feel gratitude and also for being here. Thank you very much for having me. And also I do feel optimistic about the future.
That's wonderful. I always like to hear about optimism, and it's a great pleasure to host you. It's something that I also feel gratitude for, having conversations like that. And another question, you are involved in so many interesting projects and initiatives, and we're going to shine light on them in a bit. But when I did preparation for this very conversation, I was very interested if you would like to maybe share with us a little bit what your values are. What is it that drives you in life?
Well, what drives me in life is the importance of equity and the importance of people with equal opportunities while not really having any challenges, because I believe that whoever we are all signature unique, and that importance that we should all be able to feel that we are catered for. And choice is such an important element, which is one of my key values, because I think there is more ability of having choice in society, and especially when it comes to citizens and their outlook of being able to have a kind of, an option, but also not feeling restricted within a kind of view or kind of perspective when it comes to freedom and, life in general.
When we talk about choice, where are areas in life that you feel you have a great choice and a good choice to do whatever? You may fill the blanks. And we may follow up that question, where are maybe areas in your life or in society that you see where there is not a good choice? But maybe we start with, where do you have good choice in life? So what is it that comes to mind?
I would personally say, from personal experience, I think from when you are kind of in that gestation point, you are able to have free reign. I think it changes when you kind of come into the world. And I think it changes on the factor of how you are registered to certain things. And of course, there's like that baby when you come into the world. It changes where, your life begins. However, you have choice from your own parents. But I think the other elements, it becomes very different than the meaning of choice.
And where are maybe areas that you seem today, as we have this conversation, don't feel like you have the choice that you would maybe like to have? And I know it's a very open question, but maybe we can see where that takes us.
Hmm. I think education. I think in the options of what our vacation can be, because I think if we don't have an education that we are able to choose a particular placement or a place that is quality, then I think that has a trickle effect into a person's desire in work. And I think this has been a repeated scenario for many, because we got many individuals who may not be happy within their vacation because it's been a kind of past experience of shortfalls or past experience of non-quality. So I really believe that for those choices to be able to be choices, for example, if I wanted to give a solution as well to add on to this, I think us youth and individuals who are coming with these solutions can really benefit that change to make the world become a area where you are not limited with choice, for example. But yes, I would say in quality of education, I think within our legislations and policies, um, there are policies that are written and made. However, other individuals don't seem to follow them. And I think, especially when you're talking about human rights in particular, it's quite concerning because I think those legislations are there to give you choice, but some of them are not followed. So that's another area as well. There's always room for improvement and there's always room for negotiations and kind of that, making that different really.
That I would love to talk about education and workplace and also policy in more depth in a bit. But I think it makes sense before we go there to understand a little bit better you and your activism, I just want to call it. And the first question that arose when I thought about the activistic things that you do is, since when are you an activist?
Um, I think the minute that you feel there needs to be change and the minute you are able to amplify your point of view to give a different perspective. In my own personal experience, it was from my own challenges which made me be able to do what I do currently as an activist. It wasn't a choice, but it was a hunger where I felt there needed to be change. And I think, anybody can become an activist and anybody has that ability to, of course, even listening to this podcast, for example, today and, listening to inspirational individuals and kind of taking note of what things could be changed or what could be improved and given a different perspective. With this world and kind of generation of social media, there is such an easy way now to amplify your voice and be able to give individuals and build a community with that powerful message for change as an activist.
What is maybe also a message to our audience listening when we talk about creating movements and putting thoughts into action and actually starting activistic activities? What is something that comes to mind for yourself?
I think empowerment, but also I think having a support network as well, because activism is not always easy. It can be quite, I don't know if the best word is monotonous, and it can be quite long and enduring, but we can't really give any kind of time scale on change. However, I think every little bit that we make within each day and each kind of action, it all builds to a bigger movement of change. So there's that dynamic aspect as well. And also, I think really standing for your values, standing for your beliefs, and making sure that you stand for what you know really needs to be changed, and not be deterred by, like, other individuals of world leaders who may say, oh, it's impossible, or some world leaders who may call us snowflakes, when really we just kind of like take it on the chin and kind of think, well, all we can see is that we think we're snowflakes, but we know that we are able to, of course, believe that the impossible is possible.
I like that very much. And that brings us back a little bit. You talked about really standing behind your values. And you said activism has started early for you. And I would be very interested, when and how did you first uncover or understand your values? And have they changed since then?
That's a really good question. I think I've learned that, of course, that time aspect. Sometimes I would like certain things to be a bit more quicker within the processes of change. However, I've had to tell myself that it's all in the right hands, and also the ability of what I'm doing is enough. I think there's been that element for activists where we have to kind of have that reassurance that we're doing enough, but sometimes it's not really too obvious. It's kind of done in very different ways of messaging, kind of showing that the change is being changed. And I think what I've learned is that ability where what I'm doing is enough, and that ability of making change is working. And also, there is people who are being able to share their own story within it. And that's really beneficial and powerful to see, because that's what we would like to do, is, of course, give others the voice as well, but also knowing that they feel really empowered with that ability of kind of, the change benefiting them. Even though we still have struggles, there is still more that we are succeeding in those areas, even though others may shortfall in those areas.
And I think that's a very valid and very important message that you have also, to understanding and accepting that what you do is in fact enough. And if it impacts N people, that's fine. If it impacts double the people, that's also fine. In the end, it's not so much about the old metrics and the biggest impact, but it's really what you put in, and what you do as an activist is in fact enough. And yeah, you're so involved in multiple different initiatives, I just want to call it. And the first that came to mind, because I believe it's an assumption that it's also somewhat close to your heart at the moment, is Fridays for Future. And I would be very interested, why and when did you join Fridays for Future?
I joined Fridays for Future in my mid-stage of activism. I started activism in, as I remember from my notes, started in 2022, which got the kind of big awareness. When I started kind of building it, it was in 2017. But I could say in like 2021 was when I kind of joined the movement, because the mission of climate change is a big one, and it's going to affect all of us. And there is also that element where the commodity aspect is not just the climate commodity aspect. there is a whole system issue of commodity within society, and it affects all different aspects of sectors within our society. So when we're looking at education and all those housing and everything else, because it's run off of commodity, the whole society. So this is where I also was really encouraged to join the movement, because I saw that with what my own experience and also within my tools and kind of knowledge of certain things, it needed also my involvement from that aspect, because there's been that climate commodity, but there's also the whole other commodity which we really need to kind of analyze and I think address importantly. So yes, that's when I joined Fridays for Future, and since then really benefited from wonderful actions and networks within the community. So
What makes you passionate about being part of the Fridays for Future movement?
I think the people power and also the ability of everyone really having the like-minded vision for change, and also that kind of, well, one of the big slogans that I love is anything is anything which is impossible is anything that's impossible is possible, and their slogans and their ways that they act within like online campaign, online fidelity campaigns, which we do on the strikes each Friday, is really kind of like a simple message, but really powerful. And it gets other individuals, to kind of encourage of how to kind of get involved. And you don't even really have to get involved within kind of outside protesting. So it's really inclusive, and that's what I love about it. And that is one important element of my campaigning, is about the word inclusion, because everybody can be involved. No one can be like excluded. And I think the ideas and initiatives that they create are wonderful. So
You talked about the vision of Fridays for Future and also your own vision. And I would be very interested, what is your vision for the world, or what is your vision for the climate? You may choose to answer either of those or both.
yes, so I'll start with the climate, if that's okay. In regards to the climate, I think we need to focus on the loss and damage and the Paris Agreement, two both important elements which are really prosperous and also really important for the future, because the loss and damage, especially from the amount of countries that have been like hit by war or either weather disasters, really urgently need loss and damage. And we really require stakeholders, world leaders to invest for loss and damage to be enabled, and for especially the global south to access that ability of developing their countries. And I think, that importance of human rights and the citizens for their own life and, well, existence really, because most of them have lost homes, most of them have, had environments that have been wrecked and not really improved. And this seems to be a repeated cycle. So we must end that repeated cycle for solutions. And that's what loss and damage is about. Paris Agreement now, it's the important element of the environment, and also the Paris Agreement, which was made by, I think, a number of world leaders and was agreed in Paris. And it's about the mission to net zero. So that's a really important one for us to address the climate crisis. There was a recent IPCC report that says we don't have much time. And of course, we are in that element where if we don't act, the world that we used to know will not really be existent anymore. So it's really important that we also acknowledge those elements. Within my own mission, which is called the Garnett, Claude and Brandon range, and the Claudes SEN Law, by the way, campaign. It's important that we acknowledge the importance for equity, inclusion, and also highlighting neurodiversity and quality of education. When we talk about quality of education, I'm particularly talking about special educational needs. For years, we've had this vicious cycle where students and families have had endless fights when it comes to fighting for quality of education. They've gone through court hearings, they've gone through battles of trying to, you could say, bring validation to court and lawyers of why this education is a suitable placement. And that seems to always be diluted by investment going into other areas and pots of money not going into education and not going into the success of that child or what the family is fighting for when it comes to quality of education. So, yeah, I want to make that change for families not having to face these kind of issues. And what is really important when we talk about this is parental rights and parental consent. It's parental choice and parental consent as well, because most of these decisions will be either kind of, you could say, paid off or either backhanded decisions that are not really involved with the family or the student. So we've got to kind of end that commodity aspect, which has been an increasing element to special educational needs for years. In my own experience, I've been out of education from 2017, had a placement, went through the court tribunal process, and basically they were barred, the local authority, which is known as like an LA in the UK, and they still did not deliver in my delivery of education. And this has happened for many other students in special educational needs. And they would be in this situation where they're not delivered, and there is that fact where they go through more court hearings than be in the education setting, and their years are being kind of wasted and the milestones are not being met within quality of education. So there is a big fracture within that system. So this is what I want to change, and I think that the Claudes SEN Law petition will definitely make sure that those legislations are acknowledged when it comes to the SEN Act and when it comes to the Disability Act and the aspects of special educational needs. One other element I was also going to say is within the pots of money and investment, we've had years of war, which has been very detrimental to other sectors like education and domestic affairs, for example. And you have to question the capabilities and also the elements of NATO, because what I know is in the legislations of NATO, once one country goes into war, the other countries have to support them and send their arms. But that investment that goes into arms is being taken away, in my personal experience, from the education pot and the other domestic affairs pot. And this is why in the UK, personally, we haven't seen any kind of progress when it comes to quality of education, when it comes to housing, when it comes to health and mental health in particular. We have a mental health crisis within civil servants, within citizens as a whole. And yeah, I really believe in solutions. It's time for solutions than going round and roundabout and having this kind of same old narrative being used to avoid delivery of accountability and transparency, which is highly required right now.
I can hear, and you touched on so many different topics, and I would like to stick with this quality of education for some time. And basically what you've described, I would like to make that a little bit more explicit. When you said you were rejected access to good education, what is it that exactly happened?
So I had my first year where my mum fought for 6 years for a wonderful placement, and basically it took 6 years because they did not want to invest the local authority. I had a wonderful time at my secondary, finally started. However, it ended not well. And the reason why it ended not well is because the local authority that was supposed to continue with that investment in areas they didn't. And we found that there was still that avoidance where the investment for support, investment for certain areas wasn't consistent. And I think, what we found is that now at this later stage now, I've chose a placement, but they still don't like the investment that they have to invest. So it's become where I've asked for a personal budget. Personal budget is where you are able to fund it yourself, and it's a government legislation. But the local authority would kind of ignore it or not really kind of act on the request of the parent or student who is entitled to this. But when we talk about quality of education, we're talking about like a class size of 7 students, and it's where they are able to support students with neurodiverse to learn in a different way. Some of them learn in a creative way. They have a way where, for example, if you have black writing on white paper, it would look like it's jumping out at me. So I would need to have it in a specific way, like tinted or either on like a different colored piece of paper. And that's how we are able to learn. And these are integral parts of like the special education. And also there is a thing called an education healthcare plan, which used to be called I think it was called like a statement, or it was like some other thing that was only just education. In the previous government that we've had, they thought to combine health with education, which has now brought the element of social care and other sectors to, of course, fund those other sectors to deny the delivery of education. So this has been a kind of crafty kind of idea that was kind of made, but hasn't really improved elements. And, within one of my legislation of my petition, I believe education must be about education, because if we don't have the focus on education, then we are not able to, of course, provide the resources for that student, provide teacher assistance for that student, for example, because in like exams, I would require extra time. Some other students may require extra time if they're neurodiverse, or if they're a person that is either colorblind, for example. That's a really important element as well, which some other students may be colorblind, but it doesn't get detected within an education placement. In particular, mainstream, there is like a whole breakdown of like where what mainstream is like a kind of state school. Independent is an independent school, but there is that special education, which is a class of 7, and they would have teacher assistants. They would also have that kind of support and catering for neurodiverse students. It does cost for the investment of education. However, it's productive for the student's success. And consistency and the acknowledgement of listening, I think, to parents and citizens within the situation who've had these experiences, because it becomes like a soundboard than an actual kind of taking in the discussions of what people are experiencing. And this is what's been the issue in the UK in particular.
So what I hear is that for the mainstream, as you call it, the access to education is somewhat given or possible. But for a subgroup, like you said, for neurodiverse or for other individuals with special needs, this access to quality education oftentimes is rejected or not being assured. And I would be very interested in, as you are the expert, how many people does that affect? And I don't know if you can speak for your university or for the whole UK or globally, whatever comes to mind, but that just we get an idea of how many people are affected. And I suppose what you're doing would even be very important if it's only one person who would be affected, but just to get an understanding of who is affected and since when are people aware of it and talking about it also.
Okay, so I think what I would say is in the discussion of what you said, what they're talking about, I think we have this aspect where neurodiversity is kind of a new education for some. They are more informed with the aspect of dyslexia. Dyslexia is only one element of neurodiversity. Neurodiversity is a whole spectrum. You got autism, you got ADHD, you got Asperger's, but you got like those different elements of neurodiversity where you're able to have even like a memory bank of like certain things, qualities, gifts that are signature, unique, and things that a normal person wouldn't be able to kind of take in, if that makes sense. I had one person who I knew who was a friend. She knew the whole history of the English history because of her ability. And I think in general, what I find is that neurodiverse is only a new topic. There's another individual who does this in the same space, but there's not many of us. And what I see is like there's 1 in 5 of us who have a hidden disability, because known as a hidden disability. And within that 1 in 5, I could say there is more to be done and more to be delivered within meeting our needs and within making sure we are being educated, but educated in the right way, where that kind of understanding for investment to produce success is really important.
And how is that issue taken serious in the UK? And you may answer that maybe even over a time span, maybe 5 years ago or in 2007. And what progress do you see now that we talk in 2023 about? Do you see some progress? Do you see that politicians, leaders, education systems take that request serious and hear what you are saying and what other people, other activists are saying?
Sadly, I would say it got worse. Reason why I would say it got worse is, for example, I got 2 younger siblings and they've been put into care without consent, without trace, because we don't even know where they've gone at the moment. And it's all because they've not wanted to provide for my younger siblings, who are 2 sisters, education. One has been out from, well, I could almost say she's never really kind of had an education other than her primary experience. And that was still with a kind of, it's a challenge when it comes to investment and consistency of support. It is still very much an element where there is more that needs to be done. I'm very much glad that people are sharing their stories. I am glad that people have been able to get in touch with me and also ask to share their stories as well, and even share their own challenges, because I think, this is where we need to really make sure, for example, having another war is not going to help the situation of delivering quality of education. And I think, we need to make sure these countries are developed and make sure that, we are able to focus on our individual domestic affairs, because our individual domestic affairs are really put at a breaking point, you could say, because we've got teachers that are striking currently here in the UK. We got a national strike because of pay, because of conditions. So, you've got that whole element where other people have experienced the conditions and infrastructures isn't to the best of what it could be. And I think, on the special educational needs, what I know and what I fully have an insight to is that they do have the investment, but they've just not been interested in investing in that area. And this is what has been really concerning.
Aquayemi Claude, I would like to pick up the notion of optimism from the very beginning of our conversation. If we talk about the educational system and if we talk about access to good quality education, what is it that makes you optimistic, and what is it that you would maybe also like to see as a change going forward?
Within my optimism, I believe that there is legislation that is there. I also believe that within my own campaign and petition, it can even strengthen the legislation and also bring a reminder to world leaders of what their duty and ability of accountability is when it comes to quality of education. I also feel there needs to be more investment than talk and statements. I think the talk and statements have not done our country any good. And I think it's time for now bold action within also looking for talent within our country as well, because there are many wonderful talents that we have. And I think making sure that we don't do a misuse, miss shortfall to the individuals that have been disappointed by the education system, for example. I don't think there should ever be a timescale when it comes to education. We always are able to keep learning and keep being able to be educated. And I think that importance that we need that importance of respect for one another. And I think especially for our teachers, and I think especially for our public sectors and even the students and families in particular, I think there's been a lack of respect throughout the years, unfortunately. And I think there's been misunderstanding as well along the way, which can be rectified, I'm sure.
Are there some positive examples or best practices that come to mind that you would like to share with us today that you have seen either in the UK or globally or anywhere that come to mind?
Sure. Well, my inspirations are, I think, the lyrics of music artists. So, like, even if I had to quote "Heal the World," Michael Jackson, I think, there are wonderful lyrics that we can take from that. And I think even if we look at inspirational leaders now, we could look at even Desmond Tutu, Nelson Mandela, even Martin Luther King. And I think even the activists that are currently doing their activism at this moment, like Greta Thunberg, Marcus Rashford, for when it comes to school meals, and also Malala as well when it comes to female education. And the list could go on. There are many individuals, but I think another one that I would really highly respect as well and like to share is James Brown as well, because I think within his call for equity and within his messages for systematic and social change, we really need to, I think, there are notes in those moments which I think are inspirational and also a great reminder of how we are able to have optimism, but also able to take action.
And we talked quite a bit about your activism for now, and you are also an entrepreneur. Maybe you want to talk a little bit about the role of entrepreneurship in regard to activism.
Yes, so my entrepreneur journey has come because of the awareness of the campaign. And what has been really an important element is to give individuals an ability where they could wear a shirt, for example, and it says the word signature unique, which is uniqueness, which is our slogan and which is our important empowerment message for other individuals of neurodiverse and individuals who have a hidden disability. We also have some shirts that says the Claudes SEN Law. So what we are a non-profit clothing brand, and we have made our stuff sustainable, and it's done by renewable energy, and it's stuff that has really benefited individuals, but also given that awareness and light for our campaign in a really dynamic way.
What is the goal of Garnett's clothing brand? Where would you like to develop it towards to? I think you gave a good impression of where it's coming from. You make it sustainable, you produce with renewable energies, and it should really be something special. Where would you like to grow your company or not grow your company?
What we do when it comes to our collaboration, we like to collaborate with other youth movements. We like to also collaborate with other initiatives that have the same values, same kind of outlook. One of our current goals right now is to achieve 100,000 signatures for the Claude SEN Law petition. Currently, we are at 800 and plus signatures currently with our petition, and it's growing each day. But that's one of our goals to make it be able to be put into legislation. And we also would like to, of course, keep growing, keep being able to reach out to those communities and being able to kind of, I think, continue the mission really, because I think, this is a mission which is always going to need to be there. But I also do hope that we are going into a road of solutions and not going into a road where we're back at square one again. Most of my ancestors and I think the inspirational leaders have done what they've done. They've done amazing what they've done, but unfortunately it hasn't really made like a kind of cemented solution in regards to individuals still behaving in the same way, unfortunately, within the 21st century.
One more question that I noted while you were talking earlier. You talked about a mental health crisis, and you also talked about our world leaders a couple of times. And we also, the two of us, talked about well-being and well-being economies. And if we put all those threads together, the resulting question is, what would you ask our world leaders to make different in order to create well-being economies or societies where physical and mental well-being are the priority and not just words, as you mentioned and called it earlier?
World leaders as a whole, I think for the sensible ones that are for change and the ones that want solutions, for them to be able to kind of mix themselves with individuals that are for the same mission, I think that's really paramount. And I also think that they need to question their priorities when it comes to international affairs and domestic affairs. I think it's time now that, like, for example, we've got junior doctors who are currently striking. I think it's time now that they probably understand that they may need to give them a pay rise, and they need to negotiate and make sure that people are feeling happy and deserve to be kind of enjoying their vacation, but also having a well-being that's prosperous, and also a well-being that kind of, not feeling like they've just done something and it's not being rewarded. And especially within these challenging times of the cost of living, something has to give. And I think there's that important element where, we have to weigh up the pros and the cons and really think, where is the solution going to be within it all? Because the more it goes on, the more it's going to affect other elements of life. And yeah, I think in general, we have to think of our own well-being as well. This is a tip for world leaders. And I think we also have to think about the weaknesses that we may have as well, because we are only human, but also being honest and transparent with one another and also with themselves as well.
Aquayemi Claude, I have a couple of questions that I ask each and every of my podcast guests. But before we go there, is there any topic or theme or story that you would like to share with us, or where you say we didn't shine sufficient light on it today and that you would like to discuss with me and the audience?
I think an interesting one is the artificial intelligence and technology. I would like to share in the fact that I do think it's interesting how we are going into this day and age now, but in the element meaning that there is beneficial things with technology. However, I think we also have to, as leaders, I think we also have to look at the topics which we have to deal with and address currently as well. There are wonderful kind of, beneficial things that help the neurodiverse community, for example, ChatGPT, of course. However, I think there are other things that we've got to think about: the workforce, for example, or education when it comes to ratio of human and technology, and know that we will probably require regulations when it comes to artificial intelligence, for example. I do believe that if it wasn't for social media, I wouldn't probably be able to do what I do within my campaign and within the ability of networking with individuals, and that's really been beneficial. I do feel that freedom of speech is currently at risk. At the moment in the UK, we have two bills. One is a public order bill, and another one is an online safety bill. It's said by individuals that it's not to take away our freedom of speech. However, in the online safety bill, I think it's stated in section 5 of the legislation that anyone who campaigns may be prosecuted or either have to take down that content. And of course, when I was just sharing earlier about Fridays for Future and the wonderful campaigns we do, like on a Friday, that may not happen anymore because of the online safety bill. So yes, this is a thing for all listeners. You are able to, of course, search this up and see the kind of concerning alarm bells with this bill. And also check out Kill the Bill, because Kill the Bill is a wonderful movement, for example, in making sure freedom of speech and human rights is protected, especially for activists like ourselves when we are calling for important change and beneficial rights for individuals, or when there's something really concerning, for example, what's happening in the feminist movement and what's happening in other movements when it comes to racial injustices and when it comes to housing rights. We always will forever need activists. And I really would love it that we still have activists in the next generation and the generation to come to always question the decisions of our government or leaders across the world, especially. Thank you.
I mean, we may or may not discuss if each and every one of us could be an activist. And I think to a certain extent, all of us can be, at least if we go with the assumption that we live in democratic societies. I suppose that being a citizen also includes an activistic approach on partaking and co-creation. So thank you very much for the movements that you just mentioned, and thank you also very much for all the great work that you are doing. I want to acknowledge you for all the different initiatives and activities that you are part of and that you have shared with us today. And I think it's very important work that you do. And with that, I would like to come to the first of the final 3 questions. And the first one being, what is it that makes you hopeful?
It's my fellow activists, and also I think what makes me hopeful is the next generation and the current and their enthusiastic motivation for a better world.
Wonderful. I very much like that. Thank you for sharing. And the second question would be, who are your mentors and who do you look up personally?
I would say my mum. My mum has always fought for me, and I would also say the first and foremost person is Jesus Christ himself.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And Aquayemi Claude, the third and final question for today's podcast episode is a rather hypothetical one, and I call it the 3 truths. So I would like you to envision that you are traveling in space all by yourself, actually for quite some time. Could be a couple of months or even a couple of years. And after all that solo travel, you encounter a human-like species, and they can only process 3 facts or 3 truths about humanity before they decide whether or not they want to get to know us. What is it that you tell them?
I think the message of love. I think the message of not taking everything face value. I also think the message of remembering who you are.
Wonderful. Love, something like flexibility and communication and remembering who you are. I very much like that. Thank you so much for being a guest on the Just Another Mindset podcast. And if there is any final message or last words that you have for our audience today, it's all yours.
Thank you. I think no matter what the time scale is, you are signature unique, and also knowing that anything which is impossible is possible.
Aquayemi Claude, thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me. It was a pleasure.
If you enjoy this podcast and learn from it, please feel free to share this episode with a friend or 2, and make sure to subscribe to the Just Another Mindset podcast on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please use the next 10 seconds to give the Just Another Mindset podcast a rating, and know that you will help me to create more meaningful content like this, and also that it will help other people to find this content and get inspired as well. If there is any future topic or guest that you would like to hear more about on the Just Another Mindset podcast, please let me know by leaving a comment on YouTube or sending a mail directly to contact@ismaelwondergarten.com. And if nobody told you lately, be reminded that you are worthy, you matter, and you can achieve anything.
Be yourself positive. Just another mindset.